Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this latest QGate webinar, where we'll be discussing the common pitfalls associated with new software implementations and how to avoid them. My name is Josh Dallybell, and I am your host today, and I'm kindly joined by the wonderful Yasmin Cooper as my co-host. Yes, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name's Yasmin. I'm the marketing exec at QGate. So I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A and we can run through any questions that you have at the end. But yeah, I hope you enjoy.
Fantastic, thanks, Yas. As Yas just mentioned, this webinar is also being recorded, so please don't worry about making notes. We will be making a copy available on our YouTube channel, and Yas, I think you'll be uploading it to our website as well. Hopefully the YouTube will be available by the end of the day, and you will all be receiving an email notifying you that it's up and available to watch. If you are, however, watching this already as a recording and you have any questions, then please feel free to use my contact details that you see on the screen to contact me directly with your questions, or if there's anything else that you'd like to understand more about QGate. Now, when I saw the list of registrants for this webinar, I noticed a few new names that I'm not already familiar with amongst the registrants. So for the benefit of those of you who don't already know QGate, we are essentially an operational efficiency and CRM consultancy, okay, that specializes in the use of Dynamics 365 and Power Apps to help solve our clients' business problems. And we typically work with business owners, heads of operations or IT managers in small to medium-sized organizations. And typically those businesses are anywhere up to 250 people, but I think our largest clients are somewhere in the region of kind of 700 to 800 people. Now, what they typically tell us is, actually I've jumped ahead a second, what they typically tell us is that they're scared of being left behind by digital development and are unable to scale their businesses with the systems that they have at the moment. Sometimes they're annoyed at how difficult it is to extract any kind of meaningful data from the business on which to make decisions, because it's all locked up in multiple spreadsheets or multiple systems, or that they worry that they will lose customers because their processes are too cumbersome and too manual and they lack automation and workflows. I don't suppose that sounds familiar to any of you. In case they do, then we should probably talk. Okay, on the agenda for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be covering what the common mistakes made when businesses plan and implement new software. And just to ensure that we don't just focus on the negatives, I will also be summarizing how you avoid them. And that's just before I hand over to Yaz to help me with any questions or comments that you've submitted. If you aren't already familiar with Microsoft Teams, and I guess a lot of you are already, if you locate the chat or Q&A icons on the main toolbar, that will allow you to send your questions through to us on the live call, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible before the end of today's session. Okay, let's kind of start off by looking at the problem. Now, there have been various research studies conducted on the levels of failure associated with software implementations, and they vary wildly. I think if we just look at, for example, CRM, I think anywhere between 1/3 or 2/3 of all implementations fail in some way or another. One report by McKinsey & Co found that 17% of IT projects failed so badly that they jeopardized the very existence of the businesses that were implementing them. Now, amongst the most common failures are projects going above budget, they miss important timelines, or they fail to meet the required objectives. Okay. Now, it's worthwhile mentioning that I've spent over a decade now, over 10 years, helping businesses of all types of scale and size implement a variety of software. And during that time, I've been involved in hundreds of software purchases, some involving just a few £1,000s and some involving thousands of users globally, involving multi-million-pound contracts. And I've tried, for the purposes of this webinar, to group most of the common mistakes made by software buyers into 5 groups. Okay. Now, the first of these is poor planning. And this covers quite a broad group of mistakes. And some of those start with your reasons for wanting to implement the new software in the first place. Okay. Now, there are often many triggers within a business for wanting to change systems or the way that you work. And they can be driven by different people, all of whom have different roles within the business. Often you have someone who identifies themselves as the change agent, the person who's the driver behind the change, and that could be someone new to the business, it could be an external consultant, but somebody coming in with a fresh pair of eyes. Now, I've been involved in software implementations that have taken a year. I've been involved in software implementations which have taken 18 months from when the idea is first conceived that a business needs to do things differently to when the actual software is implemented. Now, that's quite a lengthy process and a long time to remain focused. And there are countless times when a business loses sight of the problem they initially set out to resolve, which is made more difficult when there have been changes in personnel, and also the needs of the business have changed or they've evolved over that period. Now, software implementations are often tasked to people who have no prior experience of buying software, very common, especially in small businesses, or people who have this as an extra responsibility on top of their already busy work lives. And if you've never done it before, the first easy step is to Google a list of vendors in the space that you're looking at and arrange for them to demo their software and its capabilities. The problem with this is it's time consuming and you haven't necessarily articulated what it is that you need or why you need it. And what is the fundamental set of challenges in your business that you're trying to address? Now, the salesperson at the software vendor is excited that he has someone who wants a demo and that he or she doesn't think to ask all the right questions. Chances are that even if they do come around to asking the questions, you're unsure of the answers. You're unsure of the reason why that you're wanting to implement something new. Now, it's easy to get excited by all the shiny new things that each software vendor showcases on a demo, that it's all too easy to lose sight of why, as a business, you've set off on this journey in the first instance. And I have some recommendations on how to address this later on in the webinar. Now, I was in 2 minds when I was putting this slide deck together as to whether this should be lack of consultation or lack of buy-in. And the reason I settled on lack of consultation is because a lot of the problems associated with lack of buy-in of a new software implementation is associated with usage. You unpack the shiny new software and discover that your users aren't motivated to use it. Now, we attribute a lot of times this indifference with resistance to change or poor training, whereas actually the problem sometimes lies with a failure to go much further, and a result of poor planning in the early stages when you're excited about this new thing, which is going to change the way that you work, that you fail to understand the very people you expect to use it are going to react. Some of this is down to them not sharing your vision of how it impacts them. I spent many years selling software which was there to make the lives of salespeople and marketers so much easier, make them more productive, and yet the people it was implemented to help had no clue of the changes coming, and their initial reaction was, why was I not consulted on this? When did I say I needed this? Or how does IT or how does operations know what I do in my day-to-day job? In my day-to-day job, and so you have no shared ownership of the project. Now, the lack of consultation isn't just important for your end users, but also senior management and department heads under whose leadership your users reside. I've seen software projects fail because I know that my boss isn't, bought into the idea of change, and if he's not going to use it, I don't need to. And he's not really going to say anything if we all don't. Okay. The next one is change management. So the aspect of change management I want to cover here is sometimes trying to do too much too quickly. I mentioned briefly earlier that poor initial planning can help firms, and individuals lose sight of what the actual problem is that they're trying to address, and getting carried away with all the shiny new features, and you have the issue of overwhelming your users with all the changes that you need them to make. Now, I've seen businesses try and implement a new brand identity with new sales and marketing collateral and a new CRM and a new sales enablement platform all at the same time. Although this alone doesn't necessarily mean your software implementation is likely to fail, it does mean the likelihood of pushback from your users, especially if, as with the earlier point, they don't feel that they were consulted on any of it, and they don't feel they have ownership of it or any buy-in on how the business wants or why they should change the way they work. More than likely, your software users are humans, and as humans, we only have so much capacity to take on board any new information at any point in time. I was doing some reading on this yesterday. Apparently, the average attention span of humans is decreasing, and I read somewhere that it's now something like 8.25 seconds. Compared to 9 seconds for a goldfish. So you understand the challenges of introducing too much change in one go. Change can also make your users feel vulnerable and fearful about whether they're still capable, and make them question their suitability to perform what's required of them. There are some industries I've seen change implemented, and the jobs and the people performing them have, up until that stage, remained relatively unchanged for several decades. I've worked with finance companies, I've worked with insurance companies, and there are people, and again, I'd probably add law firms to that, and you've got people who've been there 20, 30 years, doing the same job and doing it in a certain way. Some users may simply feel uncomfortable with a new working way, and maybe resistant to change that disrupts their routine or way of working. They also may fear that the change will require them to work longer hours or take on more responsibilities. So all things to be aware of. I talked earlier about some IT projects taking months, if not years, before they come to fruition. And in that time, the business has grown or evolved, and maybe their requirements have changed, or the goals have moved. The number of internal systems that a software now needs to integrate with has expanded, or frankly, the new technology is redundant before it's fully functional in the business, as the industry and the expectations have moved. So the software has a short shelf life in terms of the number of users, the amount of data it can manage. As part of the planning, you and the people being tasked with the software project need to understand the trajectory of the business, your needs in the medium and long term, as opposed to just the next 12 months. And certainly, that whole timeline can have changed. If it takes you a year to implement something, the goals that you started off with may not be the same goals that need to be addressed when you're actually handing over the technology to your users. Okay. And the final one I want to add here is poor choice of partner. Now, most of the questions that software buyers ask and sellers readily answer often about the software feature set, and it's not until late into the partner or software discussion, or as part of the contract negotiation, does the question about the validity of the vendor come into question, if at all. I speak from experience. I've only been at QGate for a short number of months, and already every other conversation that we have with a new CRM inquiry is with a firm that already has a CRM system, or they already have Microsoft Dynamics implemented, and either it was done poorly to start with, or the partner is no longer on the scene. I had one conversation with a firm in Ireland. It's quite an unfortunate case that their software partner, the software vendor, was over 5,000 miles away and 3 continents away, and simply stopped responding. Now, questions that often firms shy away from or feel embarrassed to ask a new software vendor or partner might revolve around what happens when things go wrong, or what if I'm unhappy, or what happens if I want to leave. And I think as part of your evaluation and part of your requirements, you need to understand the likelihood of things not going to plan, or run through some scenarios with your potential vendors to see how they respond. The chances are that a good partner has already thought about these questions and has plans in place for when things don't go right, and is forthcoming as opposed to avoiding those types of questions. And get it documented. Someone once told me, that's all very well, Josh, but if you get knocked over by a bus tomorrow, I need it in writing to prove that's what we discussed and that's what we agreed. Okay. So I know I've kind of run through those fairly quickly there, but those are kind of really some of the most common pitfalls associated with software implementations. So how do you avoid them? Okay, the first one I want to, I guess, cover here is sit down and put together a document of your needs, your goals, your objectives. Okay, start with a checklist of your requirements and engage with all the stakeholders within your business and the various other departments that this implementation will impact, and ask them. Okay, too many businesses skip this part entirely. A, because it's time consuming, it's difficult. Somebody may, nobody may have previously documented a set of requirements, so it's easier just to simply go to the market and say, show me what you've got, and lose sight of why you started this project in the first instance. And this also needs to include foresight on the future needs of the business. Is this something you're going to struggle with asking the vendor? Ask the vendor, what does the use case look like for a firm double the size of ours? Is the technology scalable? And I know this is one of the things that Yaz and I have been working on, is putting together, a simple set of questions that as a business you need to ask yourself. We're looking at it from the perspective of a CRM system, but there's no reason why it can't be applied to any type of software, and we'll be kind of pushing that out across our website. And obviously, if you'd like a copy of that, then please drop us an email. The next one, share ownership, very simple one. You need to get people on board your project early, so they share your motivation for change. They have time to get used to how it's going to impact and improve their working lives, and think about how you're going to communicate the need for change in a way that resonates with your users. Someone once told me that whenever I hear my bosses talk about efficiency, what they're really telling me is, I want you to get more work done in the same amount of time for the same amount of money. It doesn't mean that I get to take Friday afternoons off and go and play golf. Okay, my boss might be able to do that, but as the employee, I don't get to do that. It's also important to involve all stakeholders in the implementation process, including, employees, management, and IT staff. This helps to ensure that everyone is aware of the benefits of the new software and can provide valuable feedback throughout the process. By involving all the stakeholders, businesses can ensure that the new software aligns with everybody's needs and goals. Okay. Sharing ownership will also help to some extent with the next one, which is to do with the lack of change management. And as a result of trying to do too much too quickly, but the main things here to potentially look for is a phased launch, to give you time to engage with your users and have them feel comfortable with the new software before you introduce too many changes and you battle with people feeling like they're drowning in change. Working with the right partner, here is also so important, because they should know what works and how to phase new technologies, and should have seen what approaches work and what approaches don't. This also allows employees to gradually adapt to the new software, making the transition smoother and less disruptive, but also kind of avoid the pitfall of inadequate testing. So obviously testing involves using the software with in a controlled environment to ensure that any issues are discovered and resolved before the software is rolled out to all users, and also helps with onboarding and reducing rejection because users feel that they or their peers were part of the program. Okay. The next one I want to cover here is challenge your vendor, question your vendor. Now, larger companies will have whole IT functions and procurement departments who understand service level agreements, what support for your software should look like. Ask what happens when things don't go according to plan, or there is a failure. What are support response times? Who do you need to call? Is there a phone number you can call? Where is their support based? And what does training look like for new users? Ask what happens if there is a failure on the vendor's part, okay, and the relationship breaks down. What notice period is there for ending your contract? Will they make it difficult to leave? Who owns the data held in the system? And will they help you export it to a new system? Now, these things may all seem very obvious, but it's amazing how many businesses I've spoken to who are unhappy with their current software vendor and can't answer these questions, either because they never asked the questions in the first place, or that information hasn't been readily shared. And how often do you increase prices is another one. And I've heard all kinds of horror stories of companies being tied into 3-year contracts they can't leave because the costs are prohibitive, or they don't own the data, so you can't export it to a new system, or they didn't know there is a 6-month notice period to end the contract. Okay, so be aware of ensuring that you have all of that information up front. I added this one at the last minute, and that is how you're going to measure the success of any new software tool. Now, you may have set out with all the best intentions of addressing a real business problem, and that business problem was linked to KPIs, but is your new software on track? A year or two down the line, when someone in operations or in finance sees the renewal contract and questions are asked, are we still seeing a return on this product? And suddenly, no one has been keeping an eye, no one's been keeping an eye or keeping a track, and what was once seen as an investment is now just seen as a cost center. I see this very commonly with CRM implementations. It's forgotten or lost as to why it was implemented in the first place, and has become the normal way of working for everyone, and no mark of measurement has been kept, and you're tasked with trying to find a cheaper alternative. So it's important to keep a track of whether it's helping you achieve your goals, because the questions will be asked at some point and you have to be able to answer, has it been a success? Okay, great. I know I've kind of whittled through that. Now it's over to you guys. This is where I also want to bring in Yaz. Yaz, you're on mute, just to see if there's any questions that have come through. I know we had a couple before we started this webinar as well.
Yeah, so should we do the ones that we had before first, and then give people some time to pop any in the Q&A if they do have any? Okay, so the first one that we have. So Josh, what advice would you give to someone who hasn't been involved in purchasing software before?
I think it's a difficult one because it happens so often, especially in small businesses. This request lands on your desk and somebody automatically thinks that you're going to become an expert in this over the next few days. I think this is really kind of where the checklist really helps, because it is difficult trying to come up with a set of questions where you're unsure of what those questions should be. But I think as part of that planning is, before you go and go and talk to vendors about what's available in the market, is really trying to understand your own business. How is this new software or new tool going to help? What difference is it going to make? Who's involved in the process? Who needs to be on board? very, very early on in terms of, I guess, taking ownership of this. There's some, there's people I meet I feel very sorry for. I've had conversations with people over a period of 6 months, and then it comes to, the final sign off, and there's no budget, or senior management haven't bought into it. So and this is really kind of where I think our checklist is going to help. It is all about documenting what it is why you are really essentially kind of setting off on this new journey.
Right, thank you. And then another one. So what are some of the ways businesses measure the success of software implementations?
I think that the ones that I think are most effective are the ones that are linked to some kind of KPI and timelines. Okay, so the kind of stuff that I love, I guess, is where a business, and these are probably kind of real examples. I'll leave out the names of the companies where somebody's recently come to us and said, we're a business with 100 people. This is what our turnover is, and I want to grow that by 40% over the next 3 years without necessarily having to add 40% to my headcount within the business. I think people can be more efficient, and then I want to exit the business. That they've got a definite goal, and they've got a timeline in mind by which they need to be able, that the software or the technology to be able to deliver. I've got another one where we've been approached by a firm. They have in excess of 100,000 members, and they want to grow that to 125,000. 25,000% increase in members is very quantifiable. It's measurable. There is a direct return for the organization in terms of what it means in terms of membership fees, and that's, and again, it's a very measurable, it's a very quantifiable goal, and I think this is really kind of, I think you have to ask the question internally in terms of, if we're setting out to do this, why are we doing it? So so for me, I like those ones that make the technology accountable. I like the fact that they are linked to business goals, whether that be because somebody wants to exit the business or because they want to grow it. So those are the ones that I think I personally love.
Great, thank you. We just had another question come in from Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. It's a really good question. So Andrew's question is, in terms of design, how do you get clients to attribute value to their data to ensure all the most valuable data is included and it's not swamped by fluff?
Well, yeah. Oh God, right. Now this is a difficult one, because I think one of the biggest challenges that we have when implementing, there's two things here. One of them, often when we're kind of discussing with customers about kind of bespoking their CRM experience, often it's more of a case of taking stuff out of the system than actually adding stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's getting that real kind of focus on the essentials, and I think again, I think what we have to articulate to clients during that stage is, this is not, this doesn't have to be the end product today, or the moment you deliver it. You have to be aware of overwhelming your users, and so put together a plan of implementation from the very start. This is going to be phase one, and then we're going to we'll look at subsequent phases once you've started using the tool, rather than trying to do everything in one go. It is challenging, and because the person who's, again, might be the change agent, it might be somebody in operations, it might be somebody in IT, loves all the shiny things that come out of the box, or when the software is first implemented. Yeah, I think it works from the vendor's perspective to keep the client focused on what are the key objectives that they kind of set out to address. Yeah, and it's a difficult one, and it's an ongoing challenge. You know, I agree with that. But I think, you know, I think from a vendor perspective, documenting what it is that the client came to you with, the problem that they first came to you with, and reminding them that, you know, this is what we're delivering upon, and in helping them, keeping them focused as well.
Well, thank you. Andrew, does that answer your question?
I'm happy to take that one offline, and we can have another chat about it.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot to that question and a lot. Yeah. Have you got your contact details? Is that on the next screen? Because I think that's all our
I do. Yes, I do. Yeah.
questions. Perfect. So I'll just leave that up for a moment to let Andrew note it down if he did want to take it offline. But I think that's all of our questions.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Yaz. And just to wrap up, we will, as I mentioned earlier, be sharing a copy of the video recording. So keep an eye out for that link, which will come to you via email. Anyone watching this as a live session or recording and you'd like to discuss your CRM requirements, then please feel free to reach out to me directly. As Yaz mentioned, you have my contact details on the screen in front of you. In our next webinar, we'll be looking at the CRM challenges faced by the recruitment industry. So if you'd like more information on that, please send an email out to me, although we will be pushing that out on our email newsletter and also on LinkedIn and other social platforms, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, and I guess just to finish off again, thanks, Yaz, for keeping an eye on the chat and questions. And thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Andy, for your question again. And yeah, thank you, Josh. That's great.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.